Christmas Eve. The sound was small, a flat, wet crack against baby skin, but it split something open in our family that had been sealed shut for 30 years. Brooke was filming. She was always filming. Her phone was propped against the gravy boat, her ring light clipped to her chair, like she'd come prepared for a production, not a family dinner. And when Lily screamed that high, startled wail that only a hurt infant makes, my sister's first reaction wasn't horror. It wasn't even surprise. It was pure, unfiltered annoyance. She glanced at her phone, checked the frame to make sure she was still in focus, and said, "Can someone shut her up? I'm live." I stood there holding my daughter against my chest, feeling her tears soak through my blouse, and I looked around that table. My mother stared at her plate, her mouth a thin, tight line. My father didn't move. The whole room stayed silent, while my daughter's face turned a bright, angry red. What happened in the next 48 hours cost my sister her career, my parents their pride, and me, the family I'd spent my whole life trying to hold together. But it also gave me something I didn't know I needed. The truth about who they really were. Growing up in the Ashford household meant growing up in Brooke's orbit. My sister was 5 years older, louder in every room, and from the time I could remember, she was the axis our family spun around, not because she was kind, but because she demanded it, and my parents found it easier to comply than to correct her. My mother, Patty, sold insurance until Brooke's influencer career took off, and suddenly early retirement looked possible. My father, Don, managed a textile plant and spent his evenings in a woodworking shed, sanding chairs and avoiding any real conversation. Brooke built an Instagram empire, 2.3 million followers, brand deals, and a curated feed of perfect family brunches. Her bio read, "Big sis, best life, blessed." I found it grating in a way I never said out loud. I was the other daughter, the one who worked night shifts in a pediatric ER. My parents attended every milestone. Brooke staged for content, but they barely made it to my nursing graduation. I'd accepted it like bad weather. Brooke was the sun, and I was the background sky, but I refused to let my daughter Lily grow up in that same shadow. I had hosted Christmas specifically to set our own terms. I had told Brooke clearly, no filming, no phones. She had agreed with a breezy, "Sure, I'm not a monster, Chelsea." But as I looked at the red mark on Lily's cheek, I realised I had been wrong about my sister, and even more wrong about my parents. The silence at that table wasn't just shock, it was a choice. When Garrett stood up from that dinner table, he moved with a slowness that terrified me more than if he had shouted. He did not throw his napkin down. He folded it once and placed it beside his plate exactly the way he folds a duty report before handing it up the chain of command. He walked to where my sister sat, still holding her phone, and he looked down at her with an expression I had only seen him use once before with a private who had endangered his squad through negligence. Controlled absolute silence. "Leave now," he said. His voice was not loud, it was just final. Brooke blinked and looked around the room, searching for an ally the way she usually searches for likes on a post. It was barely a tap, she said, pitching her voice higher and playing the victim. "You are all being dramatic. She is just being fussy." My mother finally spoke up. "Chelsea, honey, she did not mean it," she said without looking at me. "You know how Brooke gets. When she is stressed, you're overreacting." That phrase, "you know how she gets," was something I had heard my entire life. It was the family motto, the universal solvent that dissolved every cruel act Brooke ever committed into something small, manageable, something I was supposed to forgive. Tantrums at 13, screaming matches. At 20, doors slammed so hard the frames cracked. It was always just Brooke being Brooke. But as I stood there, holding a baby with a red handprint growing on her cheek, I knew I was never going to accept that excuse again. My father sat there with his hands flat on the table and said absolutely nothing. His silence filled the room like smoke choking out any chance of justice. Garrett repeated himself. I slowly. She picked up her phone first. She reached for her ring light. She put on her coat and walked out the door without a single word of apology. Not to me, not to Lily, not even to Garrett. Just the click of her heels on the porch steps, and then silence. The door closed behind her, and suddenly the nightmare of the slap was over, but the real war had just begun. My mother stood up immediately and started collecting dishes, trying to scrub the table clean of what had just happened, physically and emotionally, while she said, stacking plates with forced efficiency, "I hope you are satisfied, Chelsea. It is Christmas. Even your sister is fragile. Right now going through a divorce and you kick her out." I stared at her, unable to comprehend the words leaving her own mouth. "Mom," I said quietly. "She hit Lily. She tapped her." Patty snapped back. "Babies cry. You are a nurse. You should know that babies are resilient." That sentence landed like a second slap, harder than the first because this one came from my own mother. My father pushed his chair back, reached for his jacket, and headed for the door. "Dad," I pleaded, "please say something. She hit your granddaughter." He paused, one arm already in his sleeve. "Your mother handles these things," he said without turning around. "I stay out of it." And then they left too, driving home in their Buick down the highway as if they had just attended a slightly awkward dinner party rather than witnessed their granddaughter get assaulted by their favourite daughter. The silence after my parents left that night was far worse than the slap itself. At least the slap had been honest. Cruel, but honest. What followed was a cold, calculated theatre. Garrett, who had faced more threats in his time in the army than most people see in a lifetime, simply locked the front door and checked the perimeter. He didn't ask if I was okay. He knew the answer. He just sat beside me on the kitchen floor, our backs against the cabinets, and held me while I cried. Lily had finally fallen asleep against my chest, but even in her sleep, she seemed different. She flinched when the refrigerator hummed too loudly, or when the floorboards creaked. That was the moment my heart shattered completely. 3 days later, I was at the nurse's station, wrapping up a grueling 12-hour shift when my phone buzzed. It was my mother. There was no "how are you?" or "is the baby okay?" No preamble at all. "You need to apologise to Brooke, Chelsea," she said, her voice tight and impatient. "I'm sorry," I asked, gripping the phone until my knuckles turned white. "You embarrassed her," my mother continued, ignoring my confusion. "She's been crying for 3 days, and 2 of her major sponsors pulled out because of the drama you caused on Christmas. You need to fix this." I leaned against the cold wall of the break room, closing my eyes. I had heard that phrase my entire life. "You know how she gets." It was the family motto, the universal solvent that dissolved every act of cruelty Brooke ever committed into something manageable. It had covered her tantrums at 13, her screaming matches at 20, and the door she slammed so hard the frames cracked. It was a cycle, and I realised then that my parents were not just protecting Brooke, they were gaslighting me to keep the peace. Before I could even formulate a response, I received a notification on my phone. It was an email from a number I didn't recognise. The subject line was "Path Forward." It was from Tara Jennings, Brooke's publicist. "Hi Chelsea," the email read. "Brooke is devastated by what happened. This kind of family misunderstanding, if it becomes public, could seriously impact her brand and partnerships. Can we schedule a call to resolve this privately?" I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. Her brand, her partnerships. Not Lily, not the red mark on a 6-month-old's cheek, not the trauma my daughter had endured. It was always about the brand. That was the moment the fog cleared. I wasn't just fighting a sister who was a narcissist. "Dad," I pleaded, "please say something. She hit your granddaughter." He paused, one arm already in his sleeve. "Your mother handles these things," he said without turning around. "I stay out of it." And then they left too, driving home in their Buick down the highway as if they had just attended a slightly awkward dinner party rather than witnessed their granddaughter get assaulted by their favourite daughter. When Aunt Janine answered my call on the first ring, she did not sound surprised. "Chelsea," she said softly, "I was wondering when you would finally call. Honey, this is not the first time Brooke has done something like this." Hearing those words over the phone felt like a cold hand clamping down on my spine. Janine, who was my father's younger sister and the only person in our family who refused to play along with my parents' lies, laid out the truth without any sugarcoating. She took me back to Thanksgiving in 2019. It was a holiday I had missed entirely because I was deployed with Garrett in Texas at the time. My cousin Kevin and his wife Stephanie had brought their 4-year-old son, Marcus, to my parents' house. Brooke was in the middle of filming a highly lucrative, grateful family segment for one of her major kitchenware sponsors. Marcus, being a normal, hyperactive 4-year-old, ran through the background of her shop, chasing the family dog and giggling. Brooke's reaction was terrifying. She did not just yell. She grabbed Marcus by a fistful of his hair, violently yanked his head back to force him to look at her, and hissed at him to hold still. When the poor boy started to scream, she grabbed his arm and squeezed with such force that Stephanie found finger-shaped bruises rising on his skin later that night. Stephanie was furious and threatened to call the police immediately, but my mother and father intervened, dragging Kevin and Stephanie into a back room. When the door finally opened hours later, Stephanie and Kevin left with $5,000 in cash and a strict understanding. My mother called it financial assistance, but Janine called it exactly what it was: hush money. They bribed their own relatives to protect Brooke's rising career. The calculation was ugly and precise. My parents had leveraged Brooke's massive online following as a shield, telling Stephanie that nobody would believe a normal family over a beloved lifestyle influencer with millions of fans. Janine admitted she had stayed silent because Patty begged her, claiming it would ruin the entire family's future. I stood in my kitchen, my hands shaking as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. I remembered asking my mother why Kevin and Stephanie stopped coming to family gatherings, and she had smoothly lied, saying they had simply grown distant and moved away. It was a seamless, practiced lie, delivered with the same casual tone she used to ask someone to pass the salt. I thanked Janine, hung up, and immediately called Stephanie. When she answered, her voice was guarded, still carrying the raw pain of a mother whose child had been abused and silenced. "Whatever you are going to do, Chelsea, do it for all the kids she hasn't gotten to yet," she whispered. That was the moment I realised this was no longer just about Lily. This was about stopping a monster. The next morning I called Stephanie, and she picked up on the first ring as if she had been waiting for this call for 5 long years. Her voice was guarded at first, but underneath it, I could hear something raw and exhausted. She confirmed everything Aunt Janine had told me, and then added details that made my blood run cold. Brooke had not simply grabbed Marcus's arm. She had first taken a fistful of his hair, yanked his little head back sharply, and hissed at him to hold still for the camera. When the terrified 4-year-old cried harder, she squeezed his arm so violently that the bruises lasted for weeks. Stephanie told me Marcus had nightmares for 8 straight months after that Thanksgiving. He is 9 years old now and still flinches whenever anyone raises their voice near him. I sat on the edge of our bed, listening to her, my free hand resting on Lily's back as she napped beside me. The calculation my parents had made was sickening. They told Stephanie that if she went public, they would paint her as a greedy liar, trying to extort a famous influencer. Who would the internet believe? They asked. A mother with no platform, or a woman with over 2 million followers? always do in the paediatric ER when things get chaotic. I made a list. Critical. Brooke had now hurt at least 2 children that I knew of, with a clear pattern of violent behaviour spanning 6 years. Urgent. If I did nothing there, would be a 3rd victim, maybe even Lily again, or some other child at one of her future content shoots. What could wait? My own feelings of betrayal and grief. Those would have to come later. I knew I needed more than just stories. I needed something solid, something my parents could not talk or pay their way out of. That is why I called Garrett at work and told him I needed to drive to Grandma's, Ruth's house in Sanford. The 2-hour drive on familiar roads gave me too much time to think. Grandma Ruth had been the only person in our family who spoke the truth without fear. She had passed 2 years earlier, but her house still sat untouched at the end of a gravel lane because nobody could agree on what to do with it. I still had a key. The moment I stepped inside, the smell of old lavender, sachets and polished wood hit me like a wave. Her bedroom was exactly as she had left it. I went straight to the closet and found the cardboard box marked personal in her careful handwriting. Inside were letters, old photos, and a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in blue ink. It said, "For Chelsea, when the time comes." My grandmother had known. She had known this day would arrive, and she had left me the truth in her own words. I held that envelope with both hands, feeling the weight of decades of family secrets. I did not open it there. I needed to read it with Garrett beside me and Lily safe in our home. As I drove back that afternoon, I had no idea that while I was searching through Grandma Ruth's things, Brooke had been busy creating her own version of events, a version that was already spreading like fire across the internet. When I pulled into our driveway that evening with Grandma Ruth's sealed envelope tucked safely inside my coat pocket, Garrett was already standing at the front door waiting for me. His phone was in his hand and his face was set in that hard military expression he wore when delivering bad news to families during deployment. "You need to see this right now," he said, holding out the screen. Brooke had posted a video on Instagram earlier that afternoon. It was exactly 47 seconds long with perfect studio, lighting and tears that fell at exactly the right frequency for maximum sympathy. Her voice trembled like a Broadway actress hitting her cue. My own sister banned me from Christmas because I held her baby wrong. Brooke whispered into the camera while wiping a single tear from her cheek. She made her husband, my brother-in-law, the big military man, physically threaten me in front of our own parents. I have been crying for days. All I ever wanted was to spend the holidays with my family. I stood frozen in my own kitchen, watching her face on Garrett's phone screen. The video already had 1.8 million views in less than 48 hours. I scrolled down to the comments and my stomach dropped. The internet had already chosen its side. "Stay strong, Brooke. You are an inspiration. Some people weaponize their children for attention. This sounds like classic younger sister jealousy. Military husbands always think they can intimidate everyone with their uniforms." There were thousands of these comments. Strangers who knew absolutely nothing about Lily, nothing about the red handprint on my baby's cheek, nothing about the sound my daughter made when she was struck by the person who was supposed to be her aunt. And yet, they had already decided I was the villain in this story. By the next morning, my own inbox had exploded. 63 messages from accounts I did not recognize. "You should be ashamed of yourself. Brooke is a saint. I hope CPS comes and takes your baby away from you." One particularly disturbing message included our home address, along with a threat against Lily. I felt the room start to spin. Garrett took the phone gently out of my hand and pulled me into a hug. Then my email pinged again. It was from Tara Jennings, Brooke's publicist. The subject line read "Path Forward." I opened it with shaking fingers. The message was short and clinical. "This situation could be easily resolved with a brief public statement from you. save Brooke's sponsorships. They wanted me to put my name and my reputation on the line to protect the woman who had assaulted my baby. Garrett looked at me with that calm intensity of his and said, "Something I will never forget. Chelsea do not play their game on their court. We play on ours where the rules are facts and evidence." He was absolutely right. I walked into our bedroom, locked the door behind me, and finally pulled Grandma Ruth's sealed envelope out of my coat pocket. My hands were shaking as I slid my finger under the flap. The letter inside would change everything I thought I knew about my family. It would also give me the exact weapon I needed to fight back. I sat down on the edge of our bed with Garrett beside me and carefully unfolded the letter my grandmother had written before she passed. The paper was slightly yellowed and her familiar handwriting filled 3 full pages. "My dearest Chelsea," it began, "if you are reading this, then the time has finally come, and I am so sorry I am not there to stand beside you, but I knew this day would arrive. I have watched this family worship Brooke since she was a little girl, and I have watched them turn a blind eye to the darkness growing inside her. I tried to speak up many times, but your mother always silenced me." My breath caught in my throat as I kept reading. Grandma Ruth went on to explain that she had never trusted my parents to protect the things that truly mattered. She wrote that years ago, when Brooke first started making serious money, my mother had quietly begun moving family assets into Brooke's name to help her avoid taxes and build her brand. But Grandma Ruth had done something none of them knew about. Before she died, she had legally placed her entire estate, including her house in Sanford and a substantial savings account she had hidden for decades, into a protected trust. And the sole beneficiary of that trust was me. Not Brooke, not my parents, me and my children. I knew if I left anything to the family directly, they would funnel it all to Brooke, she wrote. "So I protected it for you and for the babies you would one day have. This is your legacy, Chelsea, and no one can touch it." But that was not even the most important part. Tucked behind the letter was a second sealed envelope. Inside it was a handwritten account, signed and dated by Grandma Ruth herself, detailing what she had personally witnessed at Thanksgiving in 2019. She had seen Brooke grab little Marcus by the hair. She had seen the bruises, and most damning of all, she had overheard my parents arranging the $5,000 payment to Stephanie and Kevin to keep them quiet. Grandma Ruth had written it all down as a sworn statement, even getting it notarized at her local bank, because she suspected that one day this evidence would be needed. My hands were trembling as I held that notarized document. This was no longer just my word against Brooke's carefully edited videos. This was a legal signed, witnessed account from a respected elder in our community, proving that my parents had covered up child abuse years before they did it again with my daughter. Garrett read over my shoulder and let out a long, slow breath. "Chelsea," he said quietly, "this changes everything. This is not just family drama anymore. This is proof of a conspiracy to conceal abuse." I looked down at the letter and then at my daughter sleeping peacefully in her crib across the room. For my entire life I had been the background sky to Brooke's blinding sun. But Grandma Ruth had seen me. She had believed in me, and from beyond the grave, she had handed me the one thing my family never expected me to have: power. I folded the letter, placed the notarized statement in a safe folder, and looked at Garrett. "It is time," I said. "We stop defending ourselves and we start fighting back." Holding Grandma Ruth's notarized statement in my hands, I felt a strange, quiet calm wash over me. For my entire life, I had been forced to play by my family's rules, constantly bending to Brooke's demands and accepting my parents' lies. But now the truth was written in black and white, certified by a notary, and completely beyond their power to erase. Garrett and I sat at the kitchen table, mapping out our next steps with the quiet discipline of a military operation. He looked at the documents and told me that we could not afford to make a single emotional mistake. We had to no room to run. First, I called Stephanie back. When I told her about Grandma Ruth's notarized letter, she wept openly on the phone. For 5 years, she had carried the heavy guilt of taking that hush money, feeling like she had failed to protect her son, Marcus. Knowing my grandmother had witnessed the abuse, written it down, and legally documented it, gave Stephanie the courage she had lost. She told me she was ready to stand with me and go public, no matter what my parents threatened to do. We went directly after the shield Brooke had used to protect herself for years, her corporate brand. My lawyer drafted formal letters to Brooke's major sponsors, attaching the Christmas Eve incident report, Lily's pediatric medical records, and Grandma Ruth's notarized statement detailing the chronic pattern of child abuse. At the same time, Stephanie posted her own video online. She didn't shout or cry for theatrical effect. She simply showed the photographs of 4-year-old Marcus's bruised arm from 2019, read my grandmother's sworn statement, and revealed the $5,000 in hush money my parents had paid to bury the truth. The reaction was swift and devastating. The internet, which has spent the last 48 hours calling me a jealous sister and sending threats to my home, suddenly went dead silent. The tide turned so fast it was dizzying. Thousands of comments demanding Brooke's cancellation flooded her accounts. By Tuesday morning, her largest sponsors had publicly terminated their contracts, releasing statements that they did not tolerate child endangerment. Brooke's multi-million-dollar empire was crumbling in real time, and that was when the desperate knocking started on my front door. The morning after Stephanie's video went viral, my mother showed up at my front door without calling first. She stood on the porch in her good coat, her purse clutched in both hands like a shield, wearing the exact expression she used when she was about to deliver a speech she'd rehearsed in the car. "This has gone too far," she said before I could even fully open the screen door. "Brooke is losing sponsors. 2 major brands pulled out yesterday. You need to fix this. Chelsea." I let her inside, not out of kindness, but because Lily was napping and I didn't want our neighbours hearing her raise her voice on our porch. We stood in the kitchen. I didn't offer her coffee. I didn't ask her to sit down. "She hit Lily, Mom," I said, my voice flat. My mother shook her head impatiently. "She was having a bad day, Chelsea. She's going through a divorce. You know how she gets." There it was again. The family motto. The shield they had used to protect her for 3 decades. But this time I had a sword. "I talked to Stephanie," I said quietly. My mother's face changed instantly. The rehearsed composure cracked at the edges, the way plaster cracks before a wall finally gives way. She slowly set her purse down on the kitchen counter. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "That was different," she said. "That was handled." I stared at her, feeling a cold disgust wash over me. "Handled? You mean you paid them $5,000 to keep quiet about? Brooke abusing their 4-year-old son?" My mother's eyes darted around my kitchen, looking for an escape, but there was none. "We helped them," she hissed, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. "They were struggling financially. It was a kindness. It was a family matter." I shook my head. "It was a bribe to protect Brooke's brand, and you lied to me about why they stopped coming to holidays." My mother stepped closer to me, her eyes desperate. "We can help you too, Chelsea. Your father and I can make sure you and Lily are taken care of. But you have to stop digging. You have to tell the public that Stephanie is lying. You are going to ruin everything Brooke has built." I looked at the woman who raised me, and for the first time I felt no anger, only pity. She was willing to bribe her own daughter to protect a monster. "You can't buy me, Mom," I said. "And you can't threaten me either." Grandma Ruth left her entire estate and her house to me in a protected trust. "I don't need your money. I don't need your approval," my mother gasped, realizing in that single moment that they had absolutely no leverage left. The empire was falling, and they were going down with it. I opened the front door and pointed toward the driveway. "Get out of my house," I said, "and don't 6 months have passed since that Christmas, eve when my sister Brooke slapped my baby daughter for crying during her live stream. The world I once knew is completely gone, and in its place stands something far better, something built on truth instead of lies. Brooke's influencer empire collapsed entirely. Every single major sponsor terminated her contracts within 10 days of Stephanie's video going viral. Her 2.3 million followers dwindled down to barely 40,000, most of whom now leave. Comments demanding she apologise for what she did to Marcus and Lily. She lost her luxury apartment in the city and had to move back into my parents' basement, which I find painfully ironic. The Child Protective Services investigation, backed by Grandma Ruth's notarised statement and Lily's paediatric records, resulted in Brooke being permanently barred from being alone with any minor child without supervision. My lawyer Diane also helped me secure a permanent restraining order keeping Brooke at least 500 feet away from Lily for the rest of her life. My parents tried for weeks to reach out, sending letters, leaving voicemails, even showing up at the hospital where I work. My father finally broke his lifetime of silence and wrote me a long email, begging for forgiveness, claiming he never knew how bad things had gotten. But I remembered the way he sat at that dinner table, frozen in silence while his granddaughter screamed in pain. Silence is a choice, and he made his. My mother still calls every few weeks, sometimes crying, sometimes angry, but always trying to manipulate me back into the role of the obedient younger daughter. I no longer answer her calls. I blocked her number last month after she sent me a text saying that I had killed our family. I wrote back one final message before blocking her. I told her that Brooke killed our family the moment she raised her hand against my baby, and that she killed it again the moment she chose to protect the abuser instead of the child. Aunt Janine and Stephanie have become my real family now. We have dinner together every other Sunday at my house, and Marcus and Lily play together in the backyard while we talk and laugh. Marcus is healing slowly, and his nightmares have finally stopped. Garrett retired from active duty last month and now works as a security consultant from home, which means he gets to be there for every single one of Lily's milestones. We moved into Grandma Ruth's old house in Sanford, the one she protected for me in that trust. I planted a new vegetable garden in her honour, and sometimes, when I am out there with Lily on my hip, I can almost feel my grandmother smiling down on us. Lily is thriving. She is a happy, confident toddler now who runs into rooms without flinching, and she will grow up knowing that her mother chose her above everything else. To anyone watching this who is trapped in a family that protects the abuser instead of the abused, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not crazy. You are not dramatic. You are not the problem. Protecting your child is never an overreaction, and walking away from people who refuse to protect them is not betrayal. It is the highest form of love. My grandmother left me a legacy of truth, and I am passing it on to my daughter. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. This is Chelsea, signing off from Legacy Revenge. Until next time, stay strong, stay honest, and never let anyone make you feel small for protecting the ones you love.